In 1977, a 19-year-old kid named Andy Gibb stepped onto a stage in Los Angeles, his voice soaring through, "I just want to be your everything." The crowd went wild. Thousands of fans screaming his name, flashbulbs popping, and posters waving with his face plastered across them. Billboard magazine called him disco's newest sensation that year, and Tiger Beat couldn't print enough pinups to keep up with demand. Andy was the youngest brother of the Bee Gees, blessed with movie star looks, a voice that melted hearts, and fame that seemed unstoppable. To the world, he had it all. But here's the question that lingers. What happens when everything isn't enough? Andy Gibb's life was a roller coaster of dazzling highs and gut-wrenching lows. A story that's not just about music, but about chasing dreams and facing their hidden costs. Today, we're going to walk through that story, not just to revisit his hits, but to meet the man behind them. A man who laughed easily, loved deeply, and fought harder than most of us know. If you're someone who grew up in the 70s or 80s, this one's for you. Maybe you danced to Andy's songs at a high school prom, or taped shadow dancing off the radio onto a cassette, rewinding it until the tape wore thin. Maybe you've watched other stars rise and fall, wondering why some flames burn out too soon. Andy's journey speaks to all of us who've ever chased something bigger, or loved someone who did. Let's set the scene. The late 70s were electric. Disco ruled the airwaves, and the Bee Gees were its kings, fresh off Saturday Night Fever, selling millions. Rolling Stone, in 1978, dubbed it the soundtrack of a generation, and Andy was right there, riding that wave. He wasn't just another pop star. He was a heartthrob who made fans swoon with a single glance. People magazine gushed about his angelic voice and dimpled charm, crowning him a teen idol overnight. On stage, he was all confidence, hair perfect, smile wide, lyrics promising forever. But off stage? That's where the real Andy lived. A young guy wrestling with pressures most of us can't fathom. What makes Andy's story stand out isn't just the tragedy, it's his individuality. He wasn't just another Bee Gee or a cookie-cutter star gone too soon. Variety noted in 1977 that Andy had a distinct spark, a mix of raw talent and relentless drive to be more than his brother's shadow. That spark drew millions to him, but it also lit a fire he couldn't always control. His life reminds us that fame can look like a dream from the outside, while inside it's a tightrope walk. So where did this golden boy come from? To understand Andy, we need to start with his roots, a family bursting with music, love, and expectations. That's where his story begins, in a working-class home far from the spotlight, where a kid named Andy first picked up a guitar and dared to dream big. Come with me, let's step back to England, 1958, and meet the boy who'd one day steal the world's heart and pay a price for it. Andy Gibb was the kind of kid who could light up a room with a laugh. In a 1980 People magazine profile, his mother, Barbara, described him as our little joker, always up to something, but you couldn't stay mad at him. Born in 1958, Andy was the baby of the Gibb family, growing up in the glow of his brother's rising fame. By the time he was a boy, the Bee Gees were packing clubs in Australia, and their success meant Andy's childhood wasn't exactly ordinary. The Guardian noted in a 1977 piece that the Gibbs' new wealth brought Rolls-Royces and private schools. But Andy, he wasn't one for rules. Take the horse stable story. Barbara once shared in a Women's Day interview that she'd send Andy off to school, only to find out he'd snuck off to a nearby farm. He'd curl up in the hay, napping with the horses, then stroll home smelling like a barn, insisting he'd been in class. It's a funny image, little Andy, dodging math for a snooze, but it tells us something deeper. He craved freedom, even as a kid, and his parents, charmed by his antics, often let him slide. That leniency wasn't neglect. It was love for a boy who seemed born to chase his own path. Andy's mischief showed up elsewhere too. A family friend told Rolling Stone in quote 78 about the time Andy, maybe 12, borrowed his brother Barry's guitar and busked on a street corner, trading songs for coins, and one time, a stranger's soda. He'd share it with friends, laughing, never caring about the money. But school? That was another story. At 13, Andy walked away from it for good. Variety later called it a bold move for a boy already dreaming bigger than classrooms. He wasn't lazy. He was restless, drawn to music like a moth to a flame. Growing up surrounded by fame shaped him. The Gibb household buzzed with creativity, records spinning, guitars strumming, but it also brought pressure. Andy saw his brother's names in lights and wanted his own. That mix of freedom and expectation planted seeds for his future. A spark to perform, but a habit of dodging structure that followed him into adulthood. So what happens when a free-spirited kid like Andy picks up a guitar and decides to chase his own stage? That's where his story takes off, as he starts carving a name for himself. Let's follow him to those first steps, where a teenager's dream began to meet the world. By 13, Andy Gibb was already a performer. In 1971, he was in Ibiza, Spain, where the Gibb family spent summers. The Sydney Morning Herald reported in 1977 that young Andy would set up on bustling corners, singing Bee Gees covers like Massachusetts for tourists. His voice, clear, soulful, stopped passers-by in their tracks. He wasn't just the Bee Gees' kid brother, he was a kid with a fire to be heard. Rolling Stone later called those early gigs the spark of a star in the making, and they were right. Andy wasn't content watching his brothers shine. He wanted his own stage. Fast forward to 1974, and Andy, now 16, took a bold leap. He formed his first band, Melody Fair, named after a Bee Gees song. But this was his show. A 1975 Billboard blurb noted the band's youthful energy, playing small clubs in Australia, where Andy had moved to chase his dreams. He could have joined the Bee Gees. His brothers invited him, but Andy said no. In a rare 1976 interview with Sounds magazine, he explained, "I love my brothers, but I need to be Andy Gibb, not the fourth Bee Gee." Was it confidence? Maybe. Or perhaps a quiet fear of being swallowed by their shadow. Either way, it was a choice that defined him. Australia wasn't easy. The Bee Gees had struggled there in the 60s, playing to half-empty rooms before breaking big. Andy faced his own hurdles. The Australian wrote in 75 that local crowds were curious but skeptical. Some saw him as a Bee Gee wannabe, cashing in on the family name. Yet Andy won them over, one gig at a time, with covers and originals that showed his knack for melody. His sister Leslie, living in Sydney, cheered him on, hosting him as he hustled. But money was tight for his bandmates, and Andy's habit of footing the bill for drinks and late nights. Variety called him generous to a fault in 76, strained things. Melody Fair fizzled when the others returned to England. Then came his big break, a solo single, Words and Music, released in late 1975. Cashbox gave it a nod, praising its heartfelt delivery, but it only hit number 78 on Australia's charts. Still, Andy's TV debut on a Sydney variety show turned heads. A TV Week review raved, "This Gibb's got charm and chops." At 17, he was building a name, not as a Bee Gee, but as himself. That drive to stand alone was about to take Andy across the world, to America, where his dreams and challenges would grow bigger than he ever expected. Let's follow him to the States, where disco's spotlight was waiting, and so was a stage unlike any he'd known. In 1977, Andy Gibb landed in America, and the country fell in love. At just 19, he signed with RSO Records, the label behind his brother's Bee Gees hits. His first single, "I Just Want to Be Your Everything," wasn't just a song, it was a phenomenon. Billboard reported it hit number 1 on the Hot 100 for 4 weeks, selling over 1 million copies. Rolling Stone called it a disco anthem with pop soul heart in 77. And they weren't wrong. Written by Barry Gibb in a mere 20 minutes, with Joe Walsh of the Eagles on guitar, it showcased Andy's voice, smooth, yearning, like a warm hug through the radio. Andy didn't stop there. His next single, "Love Is Thicker Than Water," climbed to number 1 in early 78, followed by "Shadow Dancing," which held the top spot for 7 weeks. Cashbox hailed it as a dance floor juggernaut, and it pushed his album "Flowing Rivers" to platinum status, per Variety, in 78. 3 number 1 singles in a row? No solo artist had pulled that off before. At 20, Andy was a superstar, his face plastered on Tiger Beat covers, his name shouted on Don Kirshner's rock concert. People magazine dubbed him the ultimate teen idol in 78, noting fans would faint at his concerts, clutching heart-shaped signs. What made Andy's music click? It wasn't just Bee Gees hand-me-downs, where his brothers leaned into tight harmonies and funk grooves, think "Stayin' Alive." Andy carved his own lane. His songs blended disco's pulse with pop's sweetness, his vocals raw, more intimate. A Melody Maker review from '77 praised his vulnerable edge, setting him apart from the Bee Gees' polished sheen. Tracks like Shadow Dancing, co-written by all four Gibbs, had a looser, youthful vibe, perfect for roller rinks and basement parties. Andy wasn't mimicking, he was redefining the family sound. The '70s teen idol craze fueled his rise. This was the era of heartthrobs. David Cassidy, Sean Cassidy, when magazines like 16 sold millions to screaming fans. The New York Times in '78 called it a fever pitch of fandom, with Andy at its peak. Girls lined up outside his hotel, tossing flowers, letters, even their phone numbers. A Teen Beat poll voted him most dreamy star over Donny Osmond, and why not? His tousled hair, shy grin, and those eyes. 17 gushed they, sparkled like the Pacific. But it wasn't just looks. Andy connected. On the Mike Douglas show, he'd blush answering fan questions, making every viewer feel like his confidant. This was disco's golden age, tied to Saturday Night Fever. The Bee Gees' soundtrack sold 15 million copies per Forbes in '78, and Andy rode that wave. His concerts were electric, glittery jackets, packed arenas, fans dancing in the aisles. The Los Angeles Times raved about his boyish charisma at a '78 Hollywood Bowl show. He sang for UNICEF with stars like Donna Summer, shared stages with Olivia Newton-John, and partied at Studio 54. To the world, Andy was living the dream. But dreams have shadows. Beneath the spotlight, Andy was stepping into a world of pressures, personal, romantic, and darker than he knew. Let's look closer at the life behind the fame, where love and loss started to shape his heart. Andy Gibb's heart was as big as his voice. In 1976, at just 18, he married Kim Reeder, a quiet English girl he'd met back in school. The Sydney Morning Herald called it a whirlwind romance that year, with the couple tying the knot in Australia, where Andy was chasing his music dreams. They were kids in love. Andy, all charm and ambition. Kim, his anchor in a world starting to spin fast. But fame has a way of pulling people apart. By 1977, as Andy moved to America for his big break, the strain showed. People magazine reported in '78 that Kim struggled with his non-stop schedule, gigs, parties, fans. When she left him, pregnant with their daughter Peta, Andy was crushed. A 1980 Women's Day interview with Kim's family revealed Andy tried to reach out after Peta's birth in '78, calling from payphones between shows, his voice breaking as he asked about his baby girl. But the divorce, finalized days before Peta was born, built a wall he couldn't climb. Peta later told New Idea in 2017, "I knew Dad's voice from records, not bedtime stories." That distance haunted Andy. Friends quoted in Rolling Stone said he'd stare at photos of Peta, promising to be there one day, but the road, and his choices, kept him away. Andy poured his longing into music. In 1979, he found a spark with Olivia Newton-John, recording their duet "I Can't Help It" for his album After Dark. Billboard praised its tender chemistry in '80, and offstage their friendship bloomed into something more. The Los Angeles Times noted they were spotted at charity galas, laughing like old friends, but the romance faded quietly. No drama, just two stars on different paths. Then came Victoria Principal, the Dallas Siren, in 1981. Us Weekly splashed their romance across headlines, calling them, quote, TV's hottest couple. Paparazzi caught them dancing at Studio 54, Andy's arm around her, both glowing. The National Enquirer in quote '81 quoted sources saying Andy was head over heels, planning a future. But Victoria, older and grounded, saw his spiraling lifestyle. Late nights, missed calls. When she ended it in quote '82, people reported Andy locked himself away for days, his heartbreak raw. Their duet, All I Have to Do Is Dream, hit number 51 per Cashbox, a bittersweet echo of what might have been. Andy craved love like he craved applause, deeply, desperately. Each loss left scars, pushing him toward shadows he couldn't outrun. Those shadows were growing darker, pulling him into a battle that fame only made harder. Let's step into that struggle, where Andy's brightest moments hit his toughest fight. By 1981, Andy Gibb's star was flickering. The same voice that topped charts was now battling a silent enemy, addiction. People magazine reported that year that cocaine had become Andy's escape, a way to keep up with the endless parties and pressures of fame. The Los Angeles Times quoted a friend in '82 saying, "Andy was everywhere. Studio 54, private jets. But he looked lost." At 23, the kid who sang about everlasting love was drowning in a life that felt anything but. Why did Andy fall so hard? Fame at 19 is a heavy crown. Rolling Stone noted in '81 that Andy felt trapped by his own image, expected to be the perfect heartthrob, while grappling with heartbreak and loneliness. After his breakup with Victoria Principal in '82, Us Weekly described him as devastated, locking himself away, barely eating. The emptiness wasn't new. It started earlier, when hits couldn't fill the void left by his divorce from Kim Reeder or his distance from daughter Peta. Cocaine promised relief, but it stole his clarity. The New York Times later called the '80s music scene a drug-fueled haze, where stars like Andy were handed everything, except help. His unraveling played out publicly. Variety reported in '81 that Andy was fired from hosting Solid Gold after missing tapings, his charm buried under erratic behavior. Broadway was next. He landed roles in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, but the Chicago Tribune noted he was axed in '82 for skipping shows, leaving producers scrambling. Then came the arrests. The National Enquirer splashed headlines about Andy detained at LAX with cocaine and a gun, his mugshot a stark contrast to his Tiger Beat days. Each slip cost him friends, gigs, and his fortune. Forbes estimated he burned through $10 million, filing for bankruptcy by, quote, '86, with just $7,000 left. Andy fought back though. A lesser-known story from Women's Day in '83 shared how he checked into a small rehab clinic in '80, desperate to get clean. He'd call his mom, Barbara, promising, "I'm trying, Mom." But the pull of old habits was fierce, and relapses followed. The Washington Post later reflected that Andy's struggle wasn't weakness. It was a battle against a disease few understood then. Every missed show, every tabloid story, was a sign of a man aching to be whole again. That ache drove Andy to fight for a comeback, a chance to reclaim his light before it was too late. Let's follow him into that fight, where hope and heartbreak collided in his final years. In 1985, Andy Gibb was ready to fight back. After years of addiction's grip, his family, especially his brothers, rallied to get him into the Betty Ford Center, a haven for stars seeking a fresh start. People magazine reported in '85 that Andy emerged sober and hopeful, determined to rebuild. For a while, it worked. He moved to a quiet place in Malibu, far from the chaos of Hollywood. The Los Angeles Times quoted a friend saying, quote, "Andy was laughing again, like the old days." At 27, he was chasing a new kind of freedom, not just from drugs, but from the weight of his past. One dream stood out: flying. Andy enrolled in flight school, training to become a commercial pilot. The Chicago Tribune ran a small '86 piece noting he'd log hours in a Cessna, grinning ear to ear after nailing a landing. A family source told Women's Day he'd say, "Up there, it's just me in the sky. No crowds, no cameras." Flying wasn't just a hobby. It was his way of reaching for control, a life beyond the spotlight that had burned him. Every takeoff felt like a promise, a chance to soar on his own terms. Music called him back too. Andy started writing again, pouring his heart into new songs. Billboard mentioned in quote, '87 that he demoed tracks like Man on Fire, a soulful plea for redemption, though it wasn't released until after his death. The Miami Herald quoted Barry Gibb saying Andy's voice still had that magic, raw and full of longing. He dreamed of a comeback album, and Island Records in Europe took notice. Variety reported in '88 that a deal was in talks. Andy flew to London, guitar in hand, ready to sign. But hope is fragile. In late '87, panic attacks hit hard. The Sun tabloid, often harsh, noted Andy missed key meetings with the label, too shaken to show up. The deal fell through. Friends told Rolling Stone he'd relapsed. The pull of old demons too strong. By early quote '88, his health faltered. The New York Times later revealed years of cocaine had scarred his heart. On March 7, 1988, just after his 30th birthday, Andy collapsed with chest pains. The Guardian reported he was rushed to an Oxford hospital, slipping away 3 days later from myocarditis, his body too worn to fight on. Andy's fight wasn't enough to save him. but it left a legacy of courage, of dreams, that still echoes today. Let's look at that legacy and why Andy Gibb still matters to us all these years later. On March 10, 1988, the world lost Andy Gibb. At just 30, he slipped away in an Oxford hospital, his heart, worn from years of struggle, finally giving out. The New York Times reported it was myocarditis, a cruel aftermath of his battles with addiction. The news hit hard. People magazine's obituary called him a voice silenced too soon, and fans flooded radio stations, requesting shadow dancing through tears. At a Los Angeles memorial, the Los Angeles Times noted hundreds gathered, leaving flowers and letters that read, "You'll always be our everything." His brothers were shattered. Maurice, in a 1989 Rolling Stone interview, shared his regret over their last call, days before Andy's death. "I was tough on him," he said, voice cracking. "Told him to shape up. I'd give anything to take it back." The Bee Gees poured their grief into music, recording "Wish You Were Here" for their '89 album One. Billboard called it a haunting tribute, its melody carrying the weight of their loss. Barry told The Guardian in quote, "Andy's light was brief, but it still shines in every note he sang. That light endures." Andy's music lives on. His hits like "I Just Wanna Be Your Everything" pop up on classic rock stations and playlists, still sparking joy. Variety reported in 2000 that the Charlie's Angels soundtrack revived shadow dancing, introducing him to new fans. Artists have covered him too. Voice Avenue's 2015 take on "I Just Want to Be Your Everything," noted by MTV, kept his sound alive. The Chicago Tribune reflected in '98 that Andy's songs capture a moment, disco's fleeting magic, youth's wild hope. His 3 #1 singles, a record for a solo debut, cemented his place in pop history, per Cashbox. Beyond the charts, Andy's story resonates. The Washington Post wrote in quote, "Spark talks about addiction in music, pushing the industry to face its shadows." Fans still share his videos online, their comments full of love. "Andy, you made us feel alive." His life reminds us to cherish talent, to hold tight to those we love. Andy's voice isn't just a memory, it's a call to keep his spirit alive, to learn from his highs and lows. Let's wrap up with what Andy taught us, and how his golden heart still touches the world. For those of us who danced to his music, who taped his songs off the radio, Andy feels like a friend we lost too soon. His voice carries lessons. To cherish the dreamers in our lives, to offer a hand when someone's slipping, to celebrate every moment that makes us feel alive. So tonight, play one of his tracks, maybe "Love Is Thicker Than Water," and let it take you back. Share his story with someone you love. Keep his light burning. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Andy Gibb's life. If his story moved you, drop a comment with your favorite song or memory. Hit subscribe for more stories of the stars who shaped our world, and we'll see you next time.